today's focus is all going to be around what do I need to know to activate my community. So obviously everybody on the call now, you're taking part within the community sport help officer apprenticeship standard, and obviously you know that a big part of your role is actually around working with the community and activating them and getting them physically active. So I'm delighted to say that we're joined by James, and James's role is a sports development officer at Active Dorset. So some of you might be aware of your local active partnership, and that's what Active Dorset is an active partnership. So James is very much going to, in a moment, he's going to kind of introduce himself, tell us about his role and how that fits in with you, because the work that James does will very much tie into the things that we need to be doing, or you may currently be doing. It's really going to help you to understand that community sector that we're working in. So I think before we do that, James has provided us with this video, which just kind of touches on what an active partnership is and what they do. So it's only about 3-4 minutes long. So we're going to give this a watch now, and then we'll let James introduce himself.
Leading an active lifestyle is a great form of enjoyment, and it can have a positive impact on mental and physical well-being, educational attainment, bringing communities together, and skills, employment and productivity. Despite this, levels of physical activity remain worryingly low. 25% of people aged 16 plus do less than 30 minutes of activity a week, and only 17.5% of young people are meeting the recommended guidelines for daily exercise. The statistics are even more acute for certain groups in society: disabled people, older people, lower socio-economic groups, and women and girls. We know that activity levels are affected by a complex system of influences, and no single organisation or intervention can create sustainable change at scale. So we need to think and act differently to develop and achieve a common vision. A common vision to make an active lifestyle the social norm for everyone. Active Partnerships are a network of 43 locally led strategic enterprises with coverage across the whole of England. We exist to get the nation more active and transform lives using the power of sport and physical activity. In particular, we want to focus our efforts on inactive people who will benefit the most from an active lifestyle. As agile and independent strategic enterprises, Active Partnerships are uniquely placed to act as change agents, using our local insight, connections and passion to make a difference where it's most needed. Active Partnerships have been changing and strengthening our approach to help us to better tackle the opportunities and challenges ahead. This involves a clearer focus on inactive or underrepresented groups, adopting a collaborative systems approach, a more in-depth understanding of local people and places, a more strategic enabling role to influence policy and affect change, developing a customer-focused, skilled and diverse workforce, coordinating the delivery of customer-led interventions to build activity into everyday life, becoming better at evaluating the impact that an active lifestyle can have on a range of social outcomes, and sharing learning of what works locally to get people active. We pride ourselves on providing trusted, high-quality services delivered by dynamic and skilled people. All 43 active partnerships are accredited to the highest governance standards recognised by Sport England. Other quality standards are also in place across the network, demonstrating our commitment to high standards, safeguarding and diversity. And a learning culture is at the heart of everything we do, constantly striving to improve and maximise impact for the communities we work with. Together, we can make a difference if we are bold and think differently about how we unlock the power of sport and physical activity to transform lives. We can all use our skills, relationships, connections, and the resources at our disposal to uncover opportunities that have the potential to help people become more physically active. Active Partnerships invite you to join with us to make an active lifestyle the social norm for everyone.
Perfect. So hopefully that's just helped to set the scene. And I'm going to hand over to James now, just to give us a little bit of detail around, obviously, maybe explaining what that video kind of was talking about, the active partnerships, and also a little bit about yourself and the role that you currently have.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Just to reiterate what George said earlier, the gardeners are currently around. So if you hear a loud strumming noise, that is me. So apologies if you do hear that. So I think I'll start with just telling you a little bit more about me and my journey to where I am now. So I graduated Bournemouth University in 2016 with a sports development and coaching science degree. And then within that summer, I applied to work at the Arts University Bournemouth. And there's two universities in Bournemouth, Bournemouth University and the Arts University. So I was employed there in a part-time role to deliver a social sport project. And it was a really unique project, and it was my first way of entering the sector, really. It's difficult to find jobs, I'm sure you all know, within the sport sector. So it was a part-time role which gave me my in, really. And then that project was funded through Active Dorset. So that's how I got to know some staff working at Active Dorset, who then offered me a part-time role to deliver a table tennis project within Bournemouth and Poole, working with the national governing body for table tennis, which is Table Tennis England. So I coordinated that, which was an outdoor table tennis festival series of events around Bournemouth and Poole, which aimed to implement behaviour change to get people playing table tennis just really socially, picking up a bat outside in their local community, placing tables in open public spaces. And that was actually a really successful project that worked really well and had some key engagement through the local community. So that was really fun. That was great. And then after that, Active Dorset offered me a full-time role in the position that I'm in now. So my current role, as George said, I'm a sports development officer. I think that term is actually becoming decreasingly used across the sector. Sport development is not really what active partnerships are tasked with right now, and I'll go into that a little bit in a second. But certainly when I started working for Active Dorset, that was my role. Sport development was my role, but now we're looking a bit more broadly. So within my current role, I sit within our children and young people team, and I'm in charge of managing two national programs, which we are funded for through Sport England. So that's school games, some of you may have heard of, and satellite clubs. So school games is all about providing each and every young person in Dorset with positive experiences of competitive school sport. So not just those ones that excel and have a good relationship with sport and physical activity, but those who might be quite inactive and have actually never represented the school. So my role is to coordinate county-wide sport events that bring together all schools across Dorset. And then satellite clubs is more closely related to what you guys will be doing. And that's about working within communities to establish sport or community-based physical activity clubs in areas of deprivation, working with underrepresented groups in society, so females, disabled, ethnic minorities, and that targets young people aged 11 to 19 who are quite inactive. So that's my current role at the moment. As it is, it's ever changing, and it's looking a little bit different now with the situation we're in. I'm sure as your roles will be as well, moving forward into how the environment changes. But I hope that gives a good overview of what my role is. George, I just wanted to move in to explain what an active partnership is in more in detail.
Yeah,
does that sound good?
That'd be great. I think I'm just going to hop in there, James, just for 10 seconds, because I think
sure.
It was really good then listening to you. And I think for the guys listening, is the work that James is doing is very much talking about that wider community as a whole and talking about the target groups, which is great. And I think that this poses two things for me that I think you guys should be firstly really interested in. Firstly is kind of use James now and be a bit of a sponge from his knowledge of working in the community. He's already spoke about people from disadvantaged backgrounds, certain target groups that are going to be really important for you to, first of all, be aware of, which I'm sure you all are anyway, but also the ways that you can kind of impact and activate those people, get them active is really important. And then the second for me is actually thinking about, with this change in kind of environments that we're having, is think about how your role and the knowledge, the skills and the behaviours that you're learning at the moment for your apprenticeship, how this is potentially going to create an opportunity. And I want you to think about, and I'm sure you've all heard of why, how and what. So think about why we do what we do. We want to get people involved in sport and physical activity. And I start to think about, can our why be a little bit bigger than maybe just working within the schools that we're working at the minute, or maybe the certain age range or target group or locality, depending on your individual situation. So there's going to be some opportunities, I think, that you can create for yourselves off the back of this call. And James is going to be really useful for that. So James, that leads perfectly into just giving us a little bit more detail around what an active partnership is, I suppose.
Yeah, so don't be, some of you may have watched that video and got a really good explanation around what active partnerships do. When I first watched it, I felt a little bit confused because it goes on for a long time. So if you're feeling like that, then don't worry. I'll try and give a little bit more of a shorter synopsis around what active partnerships are. So just to clarify, first of all, some of you may have heard the term county sports partnerships from your employers or your staff or colleagues, partners that you work with. And county sports partnerships are active partnerships. So what happened was 2 years ago, county sports partnerships like Active Dorset, they just had a rebrand and they were renamed active partnerships. So they're the same thing, they just had a rebrand and we're now called active partnerships. And county sports partnerships, for however long they've existed, up until 2 years ago, they were very much about targeting that core market. So what I mean by that is those who are already quite active, they play sport regularly, they have a good relationship with physical activity. So it's all about targeting that core market and trying to get them to do more activities, trying to get them to play more traditional team sports and trying to produce elite athletes. And there wasn't much thinking around those wider benefits of sport and physical activity for those groups outside of the core market. Now, active partnerships, since the rebound, we're looking very more broadly, like George said. So we're looking across all of the sectors. So we're looking at the public sector, so schools and health. We're looking at the private sector, so large corporate organizations and workplaces. And we're looking at our core sector still and our sports sector. But what active partnerships are trying to do is work more broadly to connect with a range of different partners locally to increase physical activity. But the main point here is to decrease inactivity. So those who aren't meeting the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines for physical activity. So that is broadly what we're trying to do. And the way we do that is by forming partnerships with key organizations within our local areas to have a more joined up approach to sport and physical activity. So I'm sure you all know that not just one entity can have a great influence on activity levels. But actually for the past 2 years, what we've realized is that within those different sectors, within education, within health, within voluntary service, we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to increase the lives of the people that we're working with, and physical activity and health is a big part of that. So we're just trying to join up our approaches to work more collaboratively to have a greater effect across our communities. And George, I think I'm going to roll into the funding now as well, if that helps.
That's perfect.
So just to explain the funding landscape. So what happens is the government, they have a strategy for sport and physical activity, which is called Sport in Future. Some of you may have read that. If not, go and check that out. That's Sport in Future. And within that document, they outline 5 outcomes for physical activity in sport. And these 5 outcomes are individual development, social and community development, mental well-being, physical well-being, and economic development. I think I missed out. So these are what we, active partnerships and Sport England, are trying to work towards to achieve, to help the government achieve those 5 outcomes. So Sport England exists as an umbrella of the government, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. They provide funding to Sport England, and then Sport England provide funding to us. So Sport England have their own strategy for sport and physical activity, which is called Towards an Active Nation. They're actually in the process of rewriting a new strategy, which will come out next year in 2021. So keep an eye out for that. And the active partnerships exist to help Sport England achieve their strategy objectives, and then to help Sport England help the Department for Culture, Media and Sport achieve their objectives. And how the funding works is Sport England provide active partnerships with a core award to deliver our strategic objectives, which is largely to decrease inactivity and increase physical activity. And we also can apply for specific projects. So so school games and satellite clubs, for example, they're national lottery funded projects. So Sport England receive lottery funding from the government, which then they disseminate to us to deliver specific projects within our local areas. So that's the funding landscape. That's how we work. We're constantly reviewed. So every 4 years we'll receive a core award from Sport England, and in line with their strategies, our funding streams will change depending on what their priorities and objectives are moving forward. So yeah, that's just a bit of context around the funding.
Yeah, great. I think that's really helpful, James. Thank you. I think for me, one of the really important things to take away from that was when James kind of explained to us the change from the community sports partnership, which is CSP, which I'm guilty of still calling it back at times, to the now be active partnership. And I want you to think about it. It's something that I think firstly as a nation, secondly as an organisation, and as coaches in this country at the minute, we're not the best at. We're getting better at, but it's about getting the disengaged engaged in sport. So we're really good. If you walk into your local town, wherever you're based at the minute, you'll see probably loads of 3G football pitches. You'll see, your rugby posts are up, cricket facilities. It's all there. But what we're not necessarily great at is actually thinking about, well, there's a very large majority of people that don't want to access those things for whatever reason. They're disengaged with them. They're not involved in that. So it's about changing that and thinking about, well, those people that aren't involved, what can we start to do differently to get them involved? And that's that behaviour change element, which is focus, is how can we get people that are disengaged, engaged? And a lot of the work that James does and the funding and the missions and the strategies is around targeting those people. So it's a big area for development for us, and we're getting better and we're learning a lot more about that all the time. And I suppose one way to learn about that, James, is through the Active Life survey and being aware of the results from that. So could you just clarify to the guys what Active Life survey is, and how do you guys at Active Dorset use that?
Yeah, so the Active Life survey is unique in that it's the largest physical activity survey of its kind. So it was created by Sport England, and there's an adult survey and a children and young people survey. The adult survey is distributed by mail, so your parents or adults might receive a letter in the post saying, Active Lives, can you complete this short survey? And that's how that's collated. And then the children and young people survey is completed within schools. So Active Partnerships, Active Dorset, we have an officer that works on Active Lives specifically for children and young people, and she works to work with the schools who have been selected by Sport England within Dorset to complete the survey, and then she'll work with them to help them make sure that they've got everything set up to complete the survey in class. So that's how the results are collated for each survey. The surveys provide active partnerships as well as any other organisations, because you, like yourselves, that can have access to the results. They provide us with an overview of how active people are within our area, so how active adults are and how active children are. So how this is measured is in reference to the Chief Medical Officer's guidelines for physical activity. So, George, I'm going to test you here. So, do you know? I hope you know the recommended guideline for children and young people for activity each day.
First, children 0 to 5 is 3 hours. Am I right in saying that a day?
3 hours. Yeah. Okay. So,
5-year-old, yeah. If
we're talking specifically about physical activity, children and young people should be active for an hour each day. And then adults, how the survey is measured, it's on average across the week is 150 minutes of physical activity, or shorter than that. You can do basically that's moderate intensity exercise. If you're talking about vigorous activity where your heart's pumping more, then you can do shorter bouts of that throughout the week.
Right. Just in there, guys, in your kind of tool pack that you were sent. And the email that I sent off the back of last week's session, there's some really good PDFs that detail everything that James has just said within there, which will break down into different target groups as well. So refer to those. If you haven't got those, pop a message and we'll get them to you. But that will help you to understand some of that data that James has just mentioned. Sorry, James, back to you.
No problem. That's a good point. Yeah. So how we use the survey results then? So we're not the results aren't an obligation for Active Dorset, so we're not Sport England we're not measured against the results by Sport England, but they're a great tool for us to use. So currently at the moment nationally, the picture for children is that only 46.8% of the whole results, for the latest results for children and young people. So only 46.8% of children are meeting the recommended guidelines of an hour of physical activity each day. And when you put that into context, it's quite shocking, because you think that they're at school for most of the day, right? They should be doing PE each day. I know most schools don't, but they should. And they're not even meeting the guidelines within school. So that means if they don't do PE in the day, that's talking about primary and secondary, they go home and they don't do any activity after school either. So they're really quite inactive. Adults, on the other hand, the latest national picture was that 63.3% of adults are meeting the recommended physical activity guidelines of 150 minutes over a week. So that's actually pretty good. That's a high percentage, just way over half. That's okay. But what the survey allows us to do is to pinpoint within each area the type of groups that are most active, the type of activities they're doing. So it doesn't just measure how active they are, it measures how they're being active. So whether they're walking to school, walking to travel, walking to work, active travel, whether they're playing team sports, whether they're playing individual sports, and any activity is also included within the survey, which is great for us. Again, a little bit of a national picture for you guys. Team sports over the past 2 years have been declining massively. So less people were playing team sports, and there's more focus on individuals being active by themselves or being active through social classes. So they're going to the gym and taking part in some yoga or some spinning classes. So that's just a little bit of an active national picture. And the biggest outcome for us since the Active Lives survey has been in existence is that the survey still tells us that there are massive inequalities in physical activity for those underrepresented groups in society, like George mentioned earlier, like those with a disability, ethnic minorities, lower socioeconomic groups, females, for example. So we're still not meeting the requirements for us to reach those groups. We might be working in our areas to target those well within our areas, but it's not coming together nationally. And now COVID has just proved that this is totally true. So you might have noticed that your communities have they look like they're more activated during COVID. More people are out exercising, which is great, but still those lower socioeconomic groups, they're not accessing the resources, mainly because they don't have them to be active. They're not meeting the recommended guidelines throughout COVID. So that's a little bit of a picture about the Active Lives survey. It's a really useful tool for us to outline the activity levels within Dorset. All of the results are available on Sport England's website. For the adult survey, there's actually a tool where you can click on what you want to see. So you could look at females in Dorset, how active they are. You could look at areas of deprivation within Dorset and how many people are active within that area of deprivation. It's really interactive, so I'd go and look at that to find out more of a picture if you're looking for that in Dorset. There's not a tool yet for children and young people, but there's still a report which will give you a picture of what it looks like nationally, and you can download some data tables which will tell you what the picture looks like in Dorset if you're interested, or Somerset or Devon.
Great, but yeah, that's brilliant, and I think that's really important that you guys, what we can try and do. I don't know if Adrian, if you can maybe find a link and share that with the guys in the group while you're listening there. But I think that's great, and that's going to potentially provide you with some great knowledge on your local area, which is going to support you with collating some evidence for your EPA around your research that you've done within the area. And it's really interesting, James, listening to kind of a decline in team sports. And I want everybody just watching this to think, and you don't need to answer this now, it's just for you and your own reflection, but why do we think that is? Why do we think that's happening? What makes it potentially more achievable to go and do sport and physical activity on your own? And also think about what you offer in your area at the moment, and are you offering activities and sessions and opportunities that are actually fitting the needs of your community? So in one of your KSBs, you're going to talk about customer insight and what measures as an effective sport and physical activity program. Now, this, just say for argument's sake, you're offering a football session to somewhere in your community, but actually what we're not doing with that football session is we're not starting to impact any of those data areas that we need to look for. We're probably getting the same group of people come to that session. We're not engaging the people that aren't taking part in sport, and actually we've already started to identify, actually maybe why don't I start to think about, and an opportunity here is running some activities where it is maybe a little bit more individual, where then people can then go and do that on their own, away from that session. James spoke about an increase in kind of the people going to gym classes, for etc. Or is that an opportunity for us to start thinking in a method such as that, rather than what we have been doing for the past however many years? So I think that's really interesting, I suppose, that leads to just thinking about ways that within your community that you've so particularly Dorset obviously is the way that you've driven behaviour change within the region. So what's kind of your focus in looking at those people that are disengaged, and that kind of, and the image here kind of suggests is, I always think with behaviour changes, I think of the Change for Life Couch to 5K type program, and because it sets that real scene of inactive to active. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know what kind of you've done within your community, James.
Yeah, I think Couch to 5K is a great example of that, George. I think first and foremost, it's really important to first understand who you're trying to target and what you want them to achieve. So it's almost looking at the end. If you could say, we want to achieve some behavior change in our community, looking at running a project or some sessions, what will success look like at the end of that? So for some individuals, it may just be, they've come to the session. That might just be a massive achievement for them. So they might come to the session, have not felt comfortable yet in actually taking part, but for them coming outside their bubble, their house, they made their way to the session, that could be an achievement for them. So it's recognizing those small steps can be a huge contributor to the wider outcome of that person leading a healthy and active lifestyle and implementing the behavior change. I'll try and use an example of where of a project which we used where we identified a target group, which worked really well. So what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so we found out, through some local insight, which we did through a race equality council, which we have in Dorset. So they work across the county to target inequalities and issues and barriers that ethnic minorities groups and faith groups have and see throughout the county. So we worked with them, and they said, actually in Dorset, you may not know this, but one of the biggest ethnic minority groups are settled travellers. So we said, okay, that's interesting, and we found out that they were congregated in this area within Poole. So we had some consultation first with the organisation, Dorset Race Equality Council, then brought in some community volunteers within that settled traveller community to find out more about their community and just general stuff really about, the barriers they face to sport and physical activity, as well as social norms and barriers to their everyday life. And what we found out is we were focusing on children and young people, and we found out that most of them, the young people, don't even attend school, for example, whether that's due to behaviour issues or whether that's due to their parents not actually having the resource to send them to school, anything like that. So we found out that actually their community is very inactive as a whole. They often don't eat a full meal each day. So to start with, we just wanted to focus on providing these young people with a safe space where they can go to hang out and just to maybe talk about any issues they have with their peers. So that's what we did first of all. Just provided a space which was a community church hall in the community. So it wasn't a sports hall with loads of equipment. It wasn't a leisure centre. They just wanted a space where they felt comfortable, and actually a lot of them visit that church anyway. So that's somewhere they felt comfortable where they could go and feel safe. So we chose that space. And then from that, a volunteer in the community, an older male, came forward and said, listen, I'm a boxing coach. I'd love to, give something back to my community. And we were like, yeah, great. He's got all his equipment, had invested a little bit of funding to set that up. So then once a week, the young people started participating in boxing, shadow boxing, really low numbers to start with. So just those core group of young people we targeted to begin with, about 5 to 10. And they started doing it once a week, and they started really enjoying it, learning the discipline of boxing, as well as the physical side of being fit and active. And then it started to grow, word of mouth, like, I'll come to this boxing session. Great, yeah, come. So the numbers started to increase each week. And then we started to really own in on what we wanted to achieve from this project and what the young people wanted to get out of it. And they said they wanted some more guidance around mental health, some sexual health, and the wider outcomes that you don't necessarily associate, or we haven't associated with sport and physical activity before. So we thought, okay, yeah, great. Physical activity is the draw here, being the boxing, it's great and fun. But if we can talk to them about the wider issues within their community and their lives, then that's a massive bonus for us. So we did that. We involved some key partners, youth workers, health workers, the reverend at the church. And now we had continuously the numbers grow week on week, and whereby you'd have some participating with boxing in the middle, and then you'd have children, young people sat around the side talking to some youth workers, talking to members of their community about their issues. And that community feeling and that aspect of, oh, actually they've listened to us, they provided us with a safe space first of all, then they provided us with some key workers to talk through our issues, and they provided an activity which is fun and we all enjoy. It just changed the community. So one key learning from that project was there was quite a lot of antisocial behaviour within that community. And next to the church, there's a little Tesco Express. And a lot of these young people used to thieve and steal from that store, and didn't have a good relationship with the staff there. Since the project has been running, theft has been down in the store because young people are off the streets and they're at this class. And actually some staff at the club, some staff at Tesco have come to the boxing club. So it's grown that much that it hasn't just, now the club's not just for children and young people, it's for adults in the community as well. So sorry, that's a bit of a long-winded story to provide you with a good project, but that is a real success that we've seen, starting really low level, targeting young people, providing with a safe space, and then it grows to them believing in the project and achieving some wider outcomes besides physical activity itself. So
no, I think that's great, and yeah, it's really interesting to see that, and I think it's interesting now for you guys to reflect a little bit on some of the work that you do and think about that knock-on effect that James spoke about. So the kind of your initial focus of that project was this core group of individuals, but it's kind of accelerated, if you like, and grown into something bigger, which is great and really powerful. I think for me, sometimes it's thinking about what we do, and we're guilty of this as coaches in the industry that we are, that I don't think often enough we step back and look at the wider picture of what we do. And actually what we do in terms of a delivery of sport and physical activity sometimes is just the tip of the iceberg. And what we don't realise is below that, those social factors and the education that they get just away from potentially developing skills and developing their baseline fitness, for example, it is massive. And actually giving them that social opportunity and breaking those barriers down is just really important. And you're doing this, but it's just being able to sometimes take a step back and look and evaluate to see the impact that you're having. And that story that James has told, I can almost imagine when you do reflect, you're going to have stories that are similar for your respected areas of industry, which is great. So I suppose I wanted to talk about one of your most successful projects, but I suppose you've obviously spoken about a really good one there. Maybe if you don't mind, could you just, it might not be your most successful project, but that was a great example of kind of boxing, using boxing, but what other projects have you had maybe in different areas?
Yeah, sure. I'll just mention quickly before I go into the next one specifically about behavior change. It's really important to remember that it's so complex. So you're talking about each individual person having a series of barriers, or a series of factors that might help or hinder their likelihood to participate in a certain activity. And they'll be so different for each and every young person. So it's really important to find out what they are, first of all, before you establish a project. And there's a number of ways you can do this. So consultation's a big one. And what we found before is when we're trying to work with a group of young people, because we won't be delivering the actual sessions and they've never seen us before, the young people are far more comfortable talking to those who they already work with. So maybe they're youth worker, or maybe they're, their club representative who they work with on a regular basis, to find out this information first, and then it feeds back to us, and then we formulate a plan to go forward with what we think will work depending on the needs of those young people. So it's just, I mean, that's just a really important factor to note, that even if you've got some general insight into, we know young people in this area are quite inactive because there's not great public transport links to the town or something like that, that's great. But it's still going to be very different for each person that you're trying to target. So, and it's an ongoing process. These barriers, these factors are constantly evolving. So again, 5 months down the line, we've been running this project. We can't assume that the same barriers that were first in place are now the same as they were before, because young people, they live complex lives, as we all know, and it's ever changing for them. So just something to note. And then, yeah, so I speak about another project that was successful. I actually talk about the project that I worked on at the Arts University Bournemouth, so my first role, which was funded through Active Dorset via a program called Sportivate. So this was a social sport program, and it was unique because the Arts University, 4,000 students, mainly a high proportion of females that attend the university. They only had 2 sports clubs that you could attend, and that was males football and female netball. That was it. That's all you could do, and you could only, there wasn't even a social side of it. So you had to go to the trial, get into the team, and you could play. So literally only about 20 to 25 people, because I think they had 2 teams, could play on these teams out of 4,000 students. And we looked at it and we're like, why is this the case? And we started off talking to senior leadership at the university and found out quickly there was a big barrier, that they didn't believe in that sport and physical activity was important for their students, because they're creative students. You know, they're working quite hard, they're working quite a lot of hours. They haven't got the time they don't want to engage in sport and physical activity. And that was just their view. And I was like, okay, fair enough. So we went and did some consultation with the young people at the uni to find out if they'd be interested in more sport activities at university. And the survey came back, 85% of I think we surveyed 800 people at the university. So 85% of those said that they would like to see more social sport opportunities at the university. So great. Fed that back to the SMT. They were shocked and were like, "Well, this is strange." So from there, we created a project called Give It a Go, and so we knew that they were quite inactive anyway. But the main thing we had to overcome is that we didn't have any facilities at the university. They don't have any facilities at all. So we had to take this into the community. So we had to find out venues which would feel safe and comfortable for the young people, the students, and we had to find out the activities which they want to engage in, which would help increase the numbers of physical activity and participation. So we involved the young people in the process from the start, which is key, which I think is evidentially vital to any project or session that you're trying to involve in. And what the main factor that came out of this project that was so influential was that we used student activators to deliver the sessions. So it was their peers that were delivering the social sports sessions. So we ended up going with fencing, hockey, climbing, and I think social football. And all of those sessions were delivered by students at the university to students at the university. And that just created a community aspect and feel, because we were initially going to run the sessions at the university across the road, Bournemouth University. And students told us that they didn't feel comfortable going to another campus where they didn't have a great relationship between the two campuses and students. So we avoided that and went peer-to-peer, which was hugely influential. And the project just grew and grew and grew. And the project now is still running today, because we proved that there was a need for the students to have a social sport program which they can engage in. And the way we increased the sustainability of the project was by proving to the SMT, the senior management team at the university, that it's not just about the activity, it's the wider outcomes. It's the social connections that these students will make. It's the mental well-being, it's the physical well-being, the community development. All of that was really key to sustaining that project. And I'll show you one thing. I'll just tell you one thing about the start of that project, which didn't work too well. So we wanted to have a big launch of this new social sport program. We were like, yeah, let's go down to the beach, get loads of taster sessions for different sports, bring in some partners, local coaches, free food, free drink. It'd be great, like a little beach party alongside some sport. We anticipated that we'd have 1,000 to 1,500 young people come, because it was Freshers Week, so the new intake of students. We got there, set it up, cost quite a lot of money, and 40 students came. So a really, really big failure for us. And we realized that we put this event on a beach with no direct public transport links, and we were relying on these students knowing in the first week of university how to get to this beach, where it was, and they just didn't. And that was a big fault on our side. But we learned from that, and from that point we involved them in everything that we did, again creating that community feel to enable the project to excel. So
yeah, that's brilliant. I think finally, that last point you said there, I think was really interesting. I think there's a lot of lessons that can be learned from that, and I think it's probably really valuable. Is that if something doesn't work from the word go, it doesn't mean that it's not the right program or the right idea. It might just mean you need to think a little bit more about what it is that you've done. And for me, the massive thing is, and you led on to that, is around liaising with the people that are going to take part. You need to know what do they want, in the sense they're the customer, and you need to provide the service for them that's going to meet their needs, which is really interesting. So think about that for yourself, guys, is when you're setting up holiday camps, clubs at schools, for example, and you're getting low numbers to start off with in your first few weeks, think about why that is. What can you change to support people to get there? Is it too expensive? Is it at the wrong time? Is it in the wrong location? All these things you need to consider and actually get the opinions of the people that they're gonna book on. So first of all, potentially the child or the parent, find out what their views are. And then the flip side, I think one of the first points you mentioned, James, I thought was amazing, is that out of the kind of 800 people or so you surveyed, 85% of them actually expressed an interest in sport and physical activity, that they wanted to do that for that social element. And that's massive, because I think we can be quite guilty of thinking, oh, they just don't want to do sport. But actually, they do want to do it. They potentially just don't want to do the norm. They don't want to just do football. They want to try alternative things, or they want it to be a more informal atmosphere, for example. They're not that worried about competition. They just want to turn up, play, have fun, whatever it might be. So think about all those people. Think about in your community. Is there 800 people? Is there a group of 20 people, but you're not asking them, are you actually interested in sport and physical activity? Is there something that you want to have and support them? So just thinking about that in further detail, I think it's going to provide many opportunities. And it's great to have your insight on that, James. So thank you again. Brilliant. So I suppose these questions are we're kind of talking about them throughout, and we spoke about it then a little bit, is what's your main kind of area to consider when you're planning these programs to engage people in sport and physical activity? What's the main focus is when you create these programs?
So I use 3 stages to help me plan. So the first stage is design. So who am I targeting? So the participants for one. But then outside of that, the partner organizations that can really help this project get off the ground and can support it and promote it. So when you're thinking around community development and who you might work with, the type of organizations that you could look to tap into, definitely your local authority. So within Dorset, we have 2. We've got Bournemouth, Christchurch, St Paul, and we've got Dorset. And within that local authority, they'll have various services for children and young people. So I'm talking about social care, family partnership zones, youth offending teams, and youth offending teams are really key, because they're always looking for activities for these young people that regularly offend to engage in. And sport and physical activity, as we know, can be a really big deterrent from engaging in antisocial behaviour. So when I'm talking about design, don't just think about the participants. Obviously, think about the deliverer as well. The deliverer is really, really key. So I'm not sure whether it be yourselves in some cases, or if not, but the connection that deliverer has with the participants is so influential to their sustained participation in that activity. And what I'm talking about here is specifically a positive first experience. So you can imagine going to a session within your community, the environment's not right. Let's say it's in an old village hall where the floor's not great, the lighting's horrible, the deliverer is like a typical in your face, you're doing this, you're doing that. And that delivery might be great when you're working with a high level competitive team that want that structure, they want that focus, because that's what motivates them. But if you're talking to your participants beforehand and find out that they just want a nice relaxed environment where they can go and take part in an activity socially, then that deliverer is probably not going to be the right person to engage with that group. So you're really thinking about who best can deliver this session that I know will have a good connection with these group of people that can help to continue their participation in the activity. Then think about the content. So again, you'll be looking at consultation with those participants to see what they want to do, maybe see what they've done before, what has worked well, what hasn't worked well in the local area before. And then also you're looking at the purpose. So you're looking at why are we doing this? What are the wider outcomes? What do we want to achieve? Then the next stage would be implementation. So now you're looking at the delivery itself. So the constant review of how it's going, as well as how the participants are engaging with it, as well as how the coach or the activity provider is feeling, how it's going. Marketing and promotion, which is really key. I'm sure you touch on this in your course, but how are you going to market and promote the sessions? Is it going to be on social media? Do your group access social media? Is it more traditional in terms of you create a poster and put that up in their organization or their school or their college? And then within the implementation, how you measure success and failure. So are you going to have regular surveys and feedback from the participants? Are you going to set some targets from the start, which you hope you'll achieve? That kind of stuff. And then lastly, the last one would be learning. So how do you excuse me, how do you plan to evaluate the project or sessions after they've finished? So you can take some key learning and reflect on that to make it better and easier when designing new projects. And then I think I've touched on that. I'm just gonna, yeah. And I was going to say a little bit about sport and the connection people have with it. I think George, you mentioned before about how the competitive sport is falling and people don't have a good connection with it. Certainly those who are quite inactive, playing competitive sport or activity might not be their main driver. So they might want to have a social side, a social session where they can come and connect with people as opposed to playing competitively. So within that scenario, within that environment, I just want to highlight the importance of volunteers. So you've got that person who's delivering the session, brilliant, but have you got that community volunteer that can help you market and promote those sessions, that can help you identify where those participants are and where the sessions might be, because they've got a great insight into their local area. So don't underestimate the importance of volunteers to the success of your community-driven projects.
Great, yeah, and thanks for touching on that last point, because that is a real an area of focus for us, is thinking about how we can maximise the use of volunteers and ensure that we're using them effectively. And again, I just want to touch on the point you said there again about kind of competitive sport, and for the guys on the call, you should be aware, if not, you'll be aware of it now, is the TT Kids program. So this is a program, James, that we've created with Table Tennis England, and it's about getting young people involved in table tennis, because essentially what they had noticed is that the membership in under 15 was declining year on year and quite rapidly, and and the average ages of some of their participants was up in the 50s. Now it doesn't take long to evaluate that and start to understand more participation figures for table tennis in 10 years. It will be incredibly low unless we do something about it now. And actually, one of the main things that they did was the TT Kids program, as they've branded it, was speaking about it as a game as opposed to a sport. And it's just by creating that connection straight away, this is a game. It's not about sport and physical activity, because if I walk into a room full of people, 100 people, and I talk about the word sport, I've potentially lost, I don't know, 60% of the room, for example, that aren't that bothered by sport. It's not going to drive. But if I talk about a game, and particularly if we're thinking about 100 children, what children don't love playing games? They all love playing games in some way, shape or form. So if we design that an activity that suits the needs of everybody, as opposed to just those sporty individuals, then we're going to have more impact with our program. So I think that's a really important thing. And I think within their planning stage, I think that's where that program, hopefully, and we'll see in the years to come, has been successful, because they're considering kind of getting everybody involved, or as many people as they can, rather than just that core group that we tend to lean on within our sector. So James, thank you for that. That was really good, really insightful.